This week on the recap, we talk about The Lion King. Ooh, come here, Monica. You know I get frisky with The Lion King.
So you might notice a few things are a little bit different on this recap. Number 1, no more formal clothing. Number 2, no more glasses. Some people were commenting on the fact that you could see a little bit of a glare, but now, poof, they're gone. Number 3, I sounded like a dead otter in the last video. I don't know, it's because I started supporting Trump or whatever the fuck it might be, but I'm going to talk a lot faster this time, I promise. It's going to be a lot more entertaining. Anyway, on to the topic of the recap, and that is racism in the United States. Recent discussions with people have brought to my attention the need for actually this discussion. I've been getting a lot of commentary from people, stuff like, oh, racism doesn't exist anymore. We don't have any racism. We have a black president. Or, I'm white and I'm not racist, so it must not exist. Don't you like how every one of my impressions is like a dumb sorority girl or something? So this brought me to a thought, and it was, are you fucking kidding me? Like, really? Really? No racism? At all? You can't think of one thing that might be kind of racist sometimes? But then I took a step back and I said, you know what, Damien? Why don't you do a little bit of research? So this prompted me to do a little bit of research, and it brought me directly to The Lion King. Yes, The Lion King, where you get to see Simba, Hakuna Matata, the fuck out of his girlfriend. And you might be thinking, Damien, what the fuck does The Lion King have to do with racism? Seriously, am I the only one that thinks it's weird that like a rodent and a boar got to watch these two lions fuck? So for most of us, Disney has provided us a way of looking at the world as soon as we reach an age where it's appropriate for us to watch Disney movies. That's usually anywhere from age 3 to about, 100. The point is that you grow up watching a lot of these movies. So let's first talk about archetypes. Archetypes tend to be found in literature, and they tend to explain certain phenomena that exist with one counteracting another. You have a light and dark, good versus evil, etc. Disney is just one example of some archetypal evidence that shows that racism is a top behavior that can be obtained even as early as 3 years old and continue into the rest of your life. Now take a step back and take a look at some of these villains that I've hoisted up here. All of these villains are drawn ever so gracefully with a pen or an ink that is far darker than their counterparts. Their protagonist counterparts, on the other hand, tend to be always lighter. Another interesting thing to note about a lot of these villains is that most, if not all of them, have accents, whereas the protagonists tend to sound American. This is not to say that Walt Disney himself was a racist. He totally fucking was. But how elaborate are such heroes that they tend to always be much lighter than their counterparts? Let's go outside of the realm of Disney, for instance, in Star Wars. Luke, come to the dark side. Somebody should get that guy a new breathing apparatus. Or even Christianity, for that matter. The triumph of good over evil always seems to be painted with a light or white hero overwhelming a dark or black foundation. But really, why on earth is that? You could arguably say that the darkness represents the unknown, and the unknown is bad to someone who's unfamiliar with a place or an area or a thing. But why is that? Truthfully, it comes down from American heritage. We come from a foundation that in and of itself is actually racist. It's not really our fault, it's more of our forefathers' fault. You know, those same guys that say, when I was your age, I used to walk 15 miles to school. Well, you're a fucking idiot. I wouldn't have even gone to school if it was fucking 15 miles away. That's ridiculous. Back to even the earliest foundations of the United States. Take, for instance, some of the acts and laws that have been passed in the United States. In 1791, you have Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution, which defines people as property. How about in 1854, the People versus Hall, where blacks are barred from testifying in court? How about in 1934, the National Housing Act, which allows for discrimination in non-white neighborhoods through a process called redlining? Now, before you say, hey, Damien, those are old as shit, there's no way that those are affecting us today. Let's take a look at an effort that was put forth in 1971 by President Richard Nixon. It's called the War on Drugs. It's something that you're probably still familiar with today. This campaign knowingly targeted hippies and blacks and associated them with marijuana and heroin, respectively. In fact, drug enforcement policy in the United States has persisted so much that they've regularly buckled down on select neighborhoods that are still targeted. These aren't just claims that I'm randomly making. John Ehrlichman, who was a right-hand man and advisor to Richard Nixon, said that they knowingly did such targeting. And you can clearly see that a lot of the highest drug and crime rates still end up being in those lower income neighborhoods, which also happen to be black neighborhoods. Now, I'd like to continue this segment next week because right now it's time for GPS. That's where we discuss someone who we think is a giant piece of shit. Today on GPS, we discuss Tomi Lahren, or as I like to call her, one of Donnie's angels. She makes me think about her vagina. I feel like that's something Donald Trump would say. That's right. The South Dakota native who hosts The Blaze, a conservative talk show where she's the only person that talks. Tomi does an opinion piece where she does her final thoughts at the end of every segment of her show. It's usually pretty animated, pretty enjoyable, and pretty offensive. It could be anything ranging from Colin Kaepernick's freedom of speech.
Colin, I support the First Amendment. I support your right to freedom of speech and expression. Go for it, bud. It's this country, the country that you have so much disdain for, that allows you the right to speak your mind. It protects your right to be a whiny, indulgent, attention-seeking crybaby. It also protects my right to shred you for it.
To coming to the defense of a totally reprehensible person.
This recording does not surprise me at all. Be honest, most of you aren't shocked either. It's Donald Trump, a billionaire businessman and reality star, not the Pope. Is anyone really that taken aback by what he said?
All the way to comparing a protest group to a hateful, racist, and otherwise destructive empowerment group. Yes, she's pretty much done it all, folks. She's offended every group that strives for progress, while at the same time standing up for groups that are less fortunate, like, I don't know, upper to upper middle class income white Christian Americans who are so heavily persecuted in the United States. Lady, give me a fucking break. It's too bad that she's always saying final thoughts at the end of every episode, because I get my fucking hopes up. And for that, Tomi, we thank you for being on tonight's GPS.